Hello and welcome to my channel, and the subject of this video will be beats, breaks and stuff, 10 albums from the 1990s. By the end of the 1980s, the classic rock era was over. What innovation and growth there was in rock came in smaller and smaller steps. In contrast, an explosion was taking place in electronic music, not only in terms of mainstream popularity, but also in the number of artists who were looking to explore how far they could go with new and relatively cheap technology. Ultimately, this led to a myriad of styles, and as the 90s progressed, the names of subgenres like breakbeat, big beat, trip hop, trance, jungle, and drum and bass entered into the wider music vocabulary. Therefore, this video is a bluffer's guide to mostly commercial manifestations of electronic music, highlighting 10 albums I particularly like. I've avoided the inclusion of well-known artists like Massive Attack, The Chemical Brothers, Ronnie Size and Represent, Portishead, Tricky, The Prodigy and Underworld. As much as I like a large amount of what they produced, they've had and continue to get plenty of attention. So what I'll do here is shine a light on a few lesser known or forgotten acts who I think are worth a mention and above all a listen. I'll go through the albums in roughly chronological order of release. To kick things off, it's Render Audible US remixes by Lassigue Benthouse from 1994. Uwe Schmidt has been a significant figure in electronic music since the early 90s, and he's used several aliases, whether they just be him on his own or in collaboration with other artists. Lassigue Benthouse was his first identity, and the album Render was his third. His first album, Matter, could probably be categorised as electronic body music, but with Render it's closer to acid house. However, instead of highlighting Render for this video, I've picked Render Audible US remixes. There's a greater energy in the remixes, and in taking away most of the original album's vocals, it reveals the quality of the music itself. If you like the acid sound of the Roland TB-303, then you get plenty of it here, and it sounds fantastic. It's not all high tempo though, as there is some ambience as well, which illustrates Schmidt's versatility and growing confidence. Into the mid-2020s, he's still going strong and now has a discography of colossal proportions, covering many different shades of electronic music. Dunia, The Intrinsic Passion of Mysterious Joy, released in 1994, is by Loop Guru. Breakbeat meets world music, and what you get is world beat. It forms a large part of this album, which was Loop Guru's first. So along with syncopated rhythms that characterise breakbeat and some dub-styled bass lines, there are overlays of sampled African or Asian rhythms, vocals and instrumentation. If you've ever heard albums like Power Katsi by Philip Glass or Passion, Music for the Last Temptation of Christ by Peter Gabriel, then the type of instruments used there are what's used here. Obviously, on a cultural level, I'm speaking from a position of ignorance, but the vocal samples have a kind of spiritual tone, which, when combined with the vibrant rhythms, creates a very positive, uplifting sound. However, for all I know, they could be singing about doing the washing up. The album gets off to a flyer with him, and the mood continues with some of my other favourite tracks being Through Cinemas, Baghdad and Freedom from the Known. Most of the first 10 tracks are in this vein and tempo. The final two, Chengo and The Third Chamber, slow things right down. The latter is almost 22 minutes of ambient, dubby, hypnotic wooziness, a fine end to a fine album. Next is Beyond the Infinite by Juno Reactor from 1995. Goa is a state in India, and since the 1960s has been a destination for hippies and other Western people looking for meaning in life through Eastern spiritualism or mysticism. In the early 90s, as techno spread far and wide across the globe, A variant of high-energy trance music called Goa Trance emerged, and in keeping with the hippie mindset, it had a euphoric and distinctly psychedelic aspect. On their third album, Beyond the Infinite, Juno Reactor well and truly immerse themselves in Goa trance, more straightforward trance, along with some traces of IDM, and what you end up with is 8 tracks, the majority of which are high tempo and high energy. Film samples are used effectively throughout the album to help bring a little extra dramatic impetus. For example, Rotorblade has a sample from David Lynch's 1984 adaptation of Dune. Ice Cube has a sample taken from an episode of the 1960s Batman series, and Feel the Universe has a clip from Oliver Stone's film The Doors. Trance is a genre I think of as having an in-the-moment appeal, which is why it's so popular with people who like dancing. In the case of Juno Reactor and their adoption of Goa Trance, Beyond the Infinite has more light and shade, and it's very much an album which you can sit down and listen to. Razorback by Sean Deason came out in 1996. Sean Deason is from Detroit and actually started out as a graphic designer working on sleeves for releases by major figures on the Detroit techno scene like Derek May and Kenny Larkin. By 1994, he was releasing his own brand of techno with Razorback, his debut album coming out a couple of years later. One of the immediate positives about the album is that Sean Deason isn't merely having a go at copying Detroit techno from 10 years earlier, and the opening track titled New School is almost a declaration of intent. Beginning with a haunting ambience, a firmer techno beat comes in, but with the ambient sitting underneath, giving it a moody and unsettled sound. That in fact lays out a template for much of the album, and it works especially well when broken beats drift in and out, such as on Wisdom 2030 Mix and Jupiter Sunrise. The Return, my favourite track of the album, flirts with drum and bass. In the end, it's this kind of mixture of older and newer styles that makes the album energetic and atmospheric at the same time. Flesh-Eating Disco Zombies versus the Bionic Hookers from Mars came out in 1996 and is by the London Funk All-Stars. The album title is a bit of a mouthful, so I won't refer to it explicitly again. The London Funk All-Stars only released 2 albums, this being the second of them. Their speciality was funk meets trip-hop meets future jazz with ample breaks. A lot of it is down-tempo with some great rhythmic physicality. Old School Reunion, Junkie's Bad Trip, and New J are all excellent. There's higher tempo on Way Out and on The Chase. The Chase has a spy film soundtrack feel with added flute and Hammond organ. Where there are vocals, they're mostly samples formed into chants, which is absolutely fine for this genre. Even though it's a long album at 72 minutes, the track placement makes sure that the tempo goes from slow to fast and then back again, often enough to keep it interesting throughout. Too bad they didn't release more. Next up is a look at what will soon be appearing on this channel.
Times to remember.
Das ist ein Groovy Beat Jahr by Jake Slazenger is from 1996. Jake Slazenger is an alias of Mike Paradinas from London, and he's recorded under numerous other aliases, most notably Music. Furthermore, he founded the Planet Mu record label, which has been an outlet for many electronic artists, including Venetian Snares, Luke Vibert, and The Gasman. Unlike his other projects, this album is retro-focused, drawing on 80s electro, mixing it with breakbeat and incorporating some funky grooves and more besides. Regardless of the alias he's using, it's a bit of a recurring theme with Paradinas to deliberately be on the cheesy side at times. Das ist ein Groovy Beat Jahr is no exception, but one of Paradinus' skills is turning what might otherwise be cringeworthy into something playful and engaging. The majority of the album is mid-tempo, with tracks being carried by strong beats and bass lines. Hung Like a Bull, Sabbath and King of the Beats work that way. On tracks like Superfunk, you get some of the and more besides, which I referred to, as it has a brilliantly catchy 60s psych organ style motif. With Lumpback Raider, there's a twisted lounge jazz feel going on. Nautilus is the most up-tempo and maybe the closest in style to Paradinus' music alias. My one criticism of the album is that the material isn't so strong as to justify an album of 1 hour and 13 minutes. 55 minutes to an hour would have worked better. In spite of that, most of the material is quirky and fun, with a dash of the ridiculous thrown in for good measure. Magnetic by Johnny L from 1998. The second album by John Lisners, aka Johnny L, and it's full on drum and bass with a few electro and IDM elements scattered here and there. Even some industrial metallic sounds as well. Where it differs from someone like Ronnie Size is that there's a darker late night mood in almost all of the tracks and fewer garage or R&B type vocals. Accelerate and Uneasy are a couple of exceptions where Lady Keir and Layla respectively provide the vocals, but the tone is moody and tense. Another track with vocals is 20 Degrees, which has a guest appearance by rapper Silver Bullet. And there's some great squelchy bass that sounds like it's well on the way towards what will be found a few years later with dubstep. Brother, Focus and Viper are other high points on the album. There are a couple of short tracks which are worth a mention too. The thumping beat of Hard Clip and the IDM sounding Exabyte are strategically placed in the track listing, which stops the album from feeling samey. And I say that because there are critics who think of drum and bass as being a one-trick pony, when in fact it can be much more diverse than some give it credit for. This album serves as a perfect illustration of that. Spaghettification by Chocolate Weasel from 1998. Chocolate Weasel was comprised of Mark Royal and Chris Stevens. Royal had another recording alias as T-Power, and he and Stevens worked together on the album The Self-Evident Truth of an Intuitive Mind. That's more in the jungle and drum and bass area, whereas Spaghettification covers a far broader range of electronica. There are breaks, some trip-hop, future jazz, and down-tempo, to name just a few styles explored. That breadth of sound in no way makes for an uneven listen, though, because the track listing is carefully worked out to make these stylistic transitions really smooth. The album contains excellent voice samples, often used to make a point. The Nonsensical Ramblings of a Lunatic Mind, for example, uses a recording that might well have been from Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, where the subject being discussed is global warming and the nature of democracy. Flying Saucers and Wiesenstein are other examples where the serious and the absurd add a touch of dark humour. A few of my favourite tracks include Tragic Mushrooms, Zen Method, Intervals and a Blue Furry Plug Hole, which has a coda that ends in such a way that, on first listen, I actually thought the disc was damaged. There's lots more too, as the album is 75 minutes long, but to the artist's credit, it doesn't feel like it. How to Operate with a Blown Mind by Low Fidelity All Stars, another from 1998. Easily the most successful of the albums I've selected, it reached number 15 in the UK album chart and number 1 in Billboard's US Heatseekers album chart. The band were from Brighton in the UK and played a more edgy form of big beat as well as incorporating other styles. There's a mix of vocalised and instrumental tracks, and with the album title such as it is, it will come as no surprise that there are a few drug references. Laser Sheep Dip Funk being the most obvious. Kasparov's Revenge and Battle Flag ensure that the parental advisory label on the cover is merited. That's not to say that either track suffers for that. In particular, Battle Flag, which features rapper Pigeonhead, is top draw and ends with a great Hammond organ section. Cool Rock Bass is another belter, high tempo with bass that lives up to the track name. The title track is the absolute highlight for me though, starting with an out in the street field recording and followed by spoken word verging on beat poetry. The track builds into a fantastic slow and funky groove. Maybe Vision Incision at 9.5 minutes is about a minute too long, but aside from that, there's not a dull moment. My last choice is yet again from 1998, and it's Form and Function by Photek. More drum and bass, but quite a different approach to Johnny L. In terms of content, it's made up of original versions and remixes of tracks previously only available on 12-inch singles. Regardless of the track version, Photek's drum and bass on this, his second album, uses minimalism and atmospherics to drive them. And this method creates a different kind of tension to Johnny L. There's less dependency on IDM embellishments or vocal samples. In this case, electronics lean more towards ambience and mood, and when voices come into play, they're spoken samples. Another contrast to other drum and bass artists I've heard is that there are relatively lengthy breaks which allow the listener to absorb the tension before the rhythm restarts. Other things I like in particular are the way Decay stretches out beats that precipitate those breaks, or where percussion is used to similar effect. Like Magnetic by Johnny L, this is what I consider to be a late night listening sort of album, but the flexibility of drum and bass is such that the follow-up albums by both artists have more of a daytime mood. My favourite tracks or remixes are UFO and the Seven Samurai, but I find that there's an impressive consistency throughout. Considering the dominant age demographic of people who watch my videos, it would be overly optimistic of me to think that I've actually tempted anyone to listen to this sort of stuff. To an extent, I get that. Sticking with what's familiar from adolescence up to one's mid-20s is a very common occurrence, and the past can seem like the only place that's safe anymore. Nevertheless, I think it's entirely possible to listen to music from after one's younger days with fresh ears and not make negative comparisons just because it's different from how things were when we grew up. To the best of my knowledge, we only live once. I welcome comments from anyone who can prove otherwise. So to cut oneself off from everything after a given date seems rather strange to me. Anyway, in the description below there's a link to a playlist containing one track from each of the albums I've spoken about. Hopefully the curious among you may hear something you like. Finally, as ever, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.